that, and then I'll take it from there. This first poem I wrote maybe 3 days after the 2016 election. It's called The Cure for What Ails You. The cure for what ails you is a good run, at least according to my mother, which has seemed all my life like cruelty. When I had a fever, for example, or a heart shipwrecked and taking on the flood. But now, of course, this is what I tell my friend whose eye has been twitching since last Tuesday, what I tell my student who can't seem to focus her arguments, who believes still that it is possible to save the world in 10 to 12 pages double-spaced. And without irony, I'm asking, have you tried going for a run? You know, to clear your head? This mother voice, drowning out what I once thought to be my own. I'll admit that when that man became the president, before terrified, I felt relief. Finally, here was the bald face of the country, and now everyone had to look at it. Everyone had to see what my loves for their lives could not unsee. Cruelty, after all, is made of distance. Sign here and the world ends somewhere else. The world. The literal world. I hold my face close to the blue light of the screen until my head aches, until I'm sick. And like a child, I just want someone to touch me with cool hands and say, yes, you're right. Something is wrong. Stay here in bed until the pain stops and oh, mother. Remember the night when, convinced you were dying, you raced to the hospital clutching your heart, and by the time you arrived, you were fine. You were sharp as a blade. 5 miles in, and I can't stop thinking about that video. There's a man with his arms raised in surrender. He was driving his car, his own car, and they're charging him, bellowing like bulls. We didn't shoot you, motherfucker, you should feel lucky for that. Yes. Okay. Fine. My body too can be drawn, like any weapon. There was a sort of period of my life where, for some terrible and terrible brain reason, I every year on Trans Day of Remembrance would write a poem. Every year I would go through the list of the names of trans people, mostly trans women of color who had lost their lives, and I wrote a poem about it. And this one I wrote in 2015, and this is the last one that I wrote. And yeah, hopefully it will be the last one that I write. It's called Empty Elegy. She was 33, bullet. 35, bullet. 20, bullet. 25, stabbed to death and run over by a pump. 66, blade. 22, bullet. 17, hit. 36, blade. 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 Bullet. 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 Stone, found dead in a field. Overdose, bullet, unknown, rope, stone, stone, bullet, oncoming traffic, his own good hands. And it becomes a kind of music, doesn't it? Senseless litany, field of roses, blood red, upturned skirts. I open my mouth and hear the pit of me, hear a flock of names, a girl spilling out onto the street. The trouble with elegy is that it asks the dead to live. It calls them back. And who am I to say, rise, walk again among those who could not bear the sight of you, your body, your one good dress. Today, someone will walk into the night and then become it. Someone's heart will crowd with beloved ghosts, and who am I to say, dance with me here a little longer? Never mind the bloodshed, darling. Never mind. Never mind. Once, a man said mine, and a woman became an empty. Once, a man said mine, and the ocean split, and the endless passage hard not to get down, but I can't help it. Poetry is where I put all of my sad little feelings, you know, so that then one can walk around in the world and pretend not to be falling apart all the time. Speaking of which, this next poem I'm going to read is an eclectic poem written in relation to this image, which I know is very hard to see. I think that it's even harder to see for you right now than it usually is, but I think it's supposed to be hard to see. This is an image by the photographer John Edmonds called Untitled 4 Facial Expression. And it is a photograph that is produced by way of something called a solarized print process, which is a photographic technique that requires extended exposure to light. This is how it gets this sort of, yeah, you can't really see it, but it's like almost silvery. It's like a kind of dark image emerging from a dark background outline, sort of silver. That's hard to see. Yeah. So this poem is called Trans Studies, Untitled 4 Facial Expression. Upon first glance, it is difficult to decipher a figure, much less a facial expression. Upon first glance, it is difficult, the figure. Upon first glance, there is no face. Upon first, undecipherable, the glance. It is difficult. It depends on who is looking. We might say, upon first glance, we are in a dark room. We are behind our eyelids in a room. We are looking in the dark. The figure before us is also behind the eyelids, their eyelids. It is as if neither we nor they are present together, though we are looking together in and from the dark. We look to work out the other's intentions. We cannot. We look. We breathe together inside the room inside. The figure, having been exposed, overexposed to light, has become like a shadow or a barely lit shape on a midnight lake. For the sake of simplicity, we could call the figure a man, but I will not. We are in the room that precedes all that, the cleavage of this from that. It goes first darkness, then form. Remember that. Try. If we look too long at the lake, what surfaces is the old thought. When I was a child, we are thrown back to before, not shame, but shame of shame. We become furious and wild wind and kind. We pass the claws between us, a rope tethering, taut. A poem, we've been taught, though we can't say where, should leave this part out. We should rush from room to bright room so we can be surprised by what we find. But the figure is still in the dark. They require our stillness, our black breath. I am afraid, I say to no one, to be like this image, upon first glance, unreachable, exposed. When I was a child, there was a figure in the dark, a man. Let's call him that, a man. I was a question. I was a question he answered. I was a question he held and demanded my stillness. Part of me lives in that room still, though I left it a new, wretched name. But, and I can say this now, he saw me, the man in the dark, when no one else could see me. When I was, in a manner of speaking, difficult to decipher, a darkness before form. He held me, stilled me. He brought me into the frame. We were two black men there, the black, the close black, the black from which life relentlessly comes. The breath between us was cool. But I could see him. I could see the sorrow, the rage, the calm water, the father raising his fist, the unnameable quiet of his face. Okay. I'm going to read two things which are versions of the same thing. One of them is from Dispatch, and one of them is very long and from this new book. I'll say the thing that I think they're doing, and then I'm just going to read them both. So this first one is called Everywhere We Look, There We Are, and it is sort of an erasure of this news article, which is from, I feel like part of me, but I can't actually talk to them, or I'm the kind of person who, I'm not very good at talking to people in real life, so I think that sometimes poetry is my way of reaching toward people who are actually in the same room as me. So both of these poems are that. And this one is an erasure of this text. And the next one, which again is very long, is a poem and maybe an essay that is a kind of series of little letters written to the 20th century poet, priest, activist, all-around kind of badass, Polly Murray, who, there's a really great documentary about them that came out in like 2020, but I, sometime during the pandemic, became a little bit obsessed with them. I think I turned 30 years old and was like, I need more dads, and Polly Murray was one of these dads to me, and so I'll read you like a long sequence about them. But first, I'll read this weird erasure. Most of the text is drawn from this news article here, but there's also some text of my own, which is just me talking about having been hit by a car, though it's hard to tell if that's what it's about. So, okay, 1. Everywhere we look, there we are. In the next room, wailing. Man, woman, other, can't tell. Any human specificity obliterated at me. Someone walks into the room where I am hidden, looks at me, my paperwork, backs away, shaking his head. Doc, it has been yesterday for 100 days. Yesterday elongated into a prison. Today, a black female disrobed of her son, black deer got rid of by black appendages of the blue coat, fully blue coat, self-made privileges. Doc, days turn over. It has been yesterday. I wander within minutes this road. As a child, I too was an impersonator. I had a body and also a life that moved no regard for form. God willing, my veil carried me. Oh, I'm fine. I'm fine. That long honey pause between I am and caught. Dear prisoner, dear alias appendage, elongated minute, parade of black, black cunning, black money, black frill and ruffle, dear duck, dear other eye, dear woman, man, self-named. This one is about Polly Murray, and it's a palinode, which means that it's a retraction of something that I have previously written. And in this case, it is a retraction of an essay that I wrote about Polly Murray, and then as soon as I submitted it for publication, I was ashamed. But that's an ordinary thing. So, it begins with 2 epigraphs. 1, the proximities of the archive disperse the feeling of otherwise being consumed by the present and its many emergencies. Jules Gill Peterson. Reading only with and for transsexuals, I read for my life. Jay Johnson. Dear Polly, I've been trying to write about you for some years now and have not been able. Well, other people might say I have been. I've given talks. There is an essay under contract, but I haven't been able yet to say what I mean. Lately, each thing I do is a form of the epistolary, apostrophe, some particular impossible you. The problem is, of course, one of audience, address. I cannot have a single thought. From what I can tell, you didn't have that problem. You were, I think, able to hold something like a nation in your head. Still, it must have eventually driven you mad, from scene to scene, institution to institution, looking for felicitous language, the precise vocabulary, syntax for making clear what to you was always clear, that you were alive. Anyway, I've been having trouble lately. The sentences either do not come or lie flat or say only what is obvious to say. Life hangs beneath the question. Dear Polly, am I right to say that, for you, the poet was, at best, a kind of prophet? Not a fortune teller, but in the biblical tradition, someone who could sense the future looming in the present, who issues the warning, if we do not change our course, we will be, and thus are already doomed. Dear Polly, in interviews, you say that writing is what enables First, I argue that you understood yourself as living somehow in the future. Ahead of myself is how you put it once, 21 years ahead. Second, I argue that this is a trans way of occupying time, living out the future in the present tense, embodying for others, for yourself, Ernst Bloch's not yet. It's easy to idealize, being imbued with machine futurity, endless becoming, longing that propels us, etc. But it's terrible, you know. Or it is also terrible. People take up all kinds of postures toward the future. Hope is one. Dread, militarized fear. I write, if all goes well, to find out what I do not know. Dear Polly, before the war, you had been in love. Not just that it is experiencing the feeling of love, but held inside of it. Held and then no longer held because love could not see you as you were, a man you tried for over a decade to become. Sex was a scene of your impossibility. People interpret this in all kinds of ways. False consciousness, schizophrenia, ego-dystonic lesbianism, transsexuality, the disease of reading, and sure, me too. In a prior scene, I am 13. I've just finished a novel, Middle Sex. I am crouching on the blue carpet in my blue room. I am straining to sense how I might too have secreted inside the capacity to change. Dear poet, about you, it was once reported that your errands were carefully planned so that you could travel in a circle, not wasting time. In the essay, I argue that, although by the late 1960s or so, you had fallen out of the future, taken up residence in the past-present tense, come to feel history more and more as a series of closed loops, we can sense, nonetheless, in your poems, your photographs, your strained sentences, your trans life preserved in the aesthetic, your still latent futures given form. Dear Polly, in 2011, in California, I rode my bicycle for miles to the office of a doctor whose name I do not any longer know. He gave me what you, nearly a century ago, had wanted with a kind of fervor I can never muster. I'm not saying it was easy. There had been psychologists and letters and prior attempts and protracted conflict and years in furtive transit and paperwork and endless, deadening talk, but it was possible. Dear Polly, I encounter a thought that breaks a little more my heart. You say finally that race and sex are biologically permanent. You grow from a child to an adult, an alien may become a citizen, and so on, but where you have a permanent characteristic, it is on the basis of one's birth that one becomes a member of that caste. It is completely imposed upon one, and there is no way that one can escape. I don't know when this thought, the finality of it, seized you. Was it your admiration of Mary Daly, her writing, her beautiful tan? Was it that you could no longer bear hope's disappointment? Was it that you were, in some important way, already dead? All I know is that, by the end of your life, having discovered no other way, you had become convinced that race, that sex, were closed forms. Polly, listen, they aren't. It isn't. Dear Polly, if you were alive now, I suspect I wouldn't so admire you. Lawyer, priest, National Organization of Women acquainted with the president's wife. But because you are dead, I do. Of course, if you were alive now, you wouldn't be in every important way you. I spend my whole life trying to convince my students of this. Our categories have histories, I say, gesturing wildly with my little nub of chalk. There, at work, I use words like contingency, discursive formations, rupture. And yet, today, walking with F around our Massachusetts town, I insist, as always, on a circular route. Coffee, then groceries, then flowers, for its tender efficiency. Oh, Polly, how can I help it? The first, the beautiful thought. You. Dear Polly, I have been wasting time. Doom is, among other things, why I'm here, trying to speak to you. Dear Polly, I guess the truth is that I am not brave, do not want to be brave. I want my classes, my students, my domestic homes. I want to move in small circles. I want 20 minutes in the morning, the blue couch. busy, that is, making life impossible, always in the name of life. I can offer endless and personal explanations, but I feel it first as numb hand, clenched thought, burdened throat. What was it you said? Race is the atmosphere we breathe from day to day, the pervasive irritant, the chronic allergy, the vague apprehension that makes one uncomfortable, jumpy. Dear Paul, even now, I can't say what I mean. Dear Polly, I'm writing to you because I cannot write. Everywhere there's language, enumerations of the problem, diagnoses the problem beginning as far back as I can imagine, farther still. In class, I pace with my chalk. I circle the room, the words, e.g. neoliberalism, biopolitics, coloniality modernity, the nuclear family form, and so on. Draw desperate, crooked lines. I say and say and say, and what for? Increasingly, I think there's only one word that might matter. No. Dear Polly, the more I look at you, the more I'm overcome with an eerie feeling, a visceral, near identification that seems against my better judgment that it might rescue me. I have become frankly fixated on this image of you, you who were prolific amidst Jim Crow, the fascist American mid-century, the Great Depression, your endless dislocation in pursuit of meaningful work, the atmosphere of anti-blackness, the deathly race gender politics of the university, your loneliness, your unruly mind, the thwarting of your trans desires during a tipping point when sex change was heralded as newly possible, fixated on the question simply of how you thought under these conditions, how you endured the present tense. Dear Polly, no. No, 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 no. Dear Polly, I am standing before a crowd of people I admire, talking incoherently about you, my pursuit of you. What everyone will remember is that I am lonely, or that I have formal questions about loneliness, about whether it is a feeling that produces continuity, a desire for continuity, where there might more ethically be rupture. All day, they come up to report that they like what I said about loneliness, which makes me suspicious. Am I lonely? Am I lonely? The days are crowded with other people. Dear Polly, I look for as long as I can stand at one particular image. You as young man, you as Pete, you as self-proclaimed vagabond in a leather coat. I go tender for this image. You are young, little brother, so young. This is before Bellevue and the rest home, before the arrests and the intake forms and your desperate lines, before you spread beneath the knife in search of hidden organs, before the first end of love, before you are refused and refused and refused and made, I can't help but think, into the bravest thing, black girl, black woman. Once, after a talk, someone asked if I thought the name, your name, Pete, was a biblical reference. Peter, Paul, etc. Honestly, it hadn't occurred to me. Dear Polly, as far as I know, there is no tense, not in English, to describe the shape of time you held in the sea. The was will be, the salted circle, the still not yet. Dear Polly, your name for her, your first great love, was Pan. Pete and Pan. The boy who would not grow up. The boy who returns and returns to the same house, the same window, though nothing ever is the same. Polly, the truth is, after all this time, I want him simply to have lived. I think this means, shamefully, inconceivably, I want to live, to have lived. And though no word was uttered above the tumult of advancing tide, you came uncalled and placed your hand in mine. Thanks. One more. I said thank you because I feel like asking people to sit with me through that is a thing. And I want to end with maybe like, I don't know. For years entirely from language from other people. In this case, it's speech entirely from people who are, regardless of whether or not they would agree with me, my friends, or Lucille Clifton, who is a friend of my mind. It's called Cento Between the Ending and the End. Sometimes you don't die when you're supposed to, and now I have a choice. Repair a world or build a new one. Inside my body, a white door opens into a place queerly brimming with gold light. So velvet gold, it is like the world hasn't happened. When I call out, all my friends are there. Everyone we love is still alive, gathered at the lakeside like constellations. My honeykin, honeyed light beneath the sky, a garden, blue stalks, white buds, the moon's marble glow, the fire, distant and flickering, the body whole, bright-winged, brimming with the hours of the day, beautiful, nameless planet. Oh, friends, my friends, bloom how you must, wild, until we are free. Thanks. Now I'm done, I promise.
That was fantastic. Wow. I loved sitting through the long piece, and I think everyone else did too. We have some time for a few questions, if you don't mind fielding them, or comments, if anyone would like to ask or say something. Yes, Jean.
I wanted to ask what your revision process is like.
I feel like there's the responsible answer, and then there's the true answer. And maybe I'll give you the true answer. I think that by the time a poem gets to my Word document of poems, then it's really hard for me to revise it. But because I think I write very slowly, I'm not a person who writes every day. I'm a person who walks around, kind of accumulating things in my head. And then when I have the feeling that there is a poem there, I write it longhand, and then I transfer the longhand, and it gets revised in the process of transferring the longhand into a Scrivener file. And then I transfer it from the Scrivener file to the Word document, and that tends to be the final form. So I think that sometimes I say that I don't really revise, but I think that it's that every poem I write goes through at least 3 different versions. One which is kind of just the blurt, one which is where I try to give it a shape, and then the final one which is where I try to think, okay, what is this poem actually doing, and how can I make it do that kind of more, right? How can I make it do it more or more intentionally? And that is when it gets into the Word document. And after that, it's really hard for me to get back into it. Yeah, I have a few tricks, but mostly it's either it's done and it's either good or bad. It either stays or it gets put in the trash. I think I saw another hand over there. Is that true?
Oh, there's a hand over here.
Oh.
Yes, good luck.
I was going to ask, first off, thank you. I really enjoyed that. And I was going to ask, what music do you listen to, and has music had any impact on how you write?
The answer is yes, but I think I only listen to music as it's my way of tricking myself into doing other things. I have a playlist that I listen to every morning as a way of tricking myself into getting into the day, And I have my various playlists for running, which are my way of tricking myself into moving. But otherwise, yeah, not a big music person, which I think is weird because I think I'm really
wanted to ask about shame, because you preface the Palinode poem with an account of submitting an essay, after which you felt great shame.
Yes.
You're a poet and a scholar. Is it the case that your poetry occupies a relationship to your scholarship in which it redeems the shame that you feel about taking an intellectual position with respect to something rather than, say, an artistic or poetic position? Or is it just contingent in this case?
Oh, I mean, I don't think I've redeemed my shame. I think I'm shamed basically all the way down. What is it that you said to a quote? Queerness names the site of those tuned most durably to the note of shame. That's just, yeah. So I do a lot of things motivated by shame and motivated by the desire not to redeem it, but to be interested in it rather than to be interested in it rather than give in to the impulse to simply hide, you know. And so I do this thing all the time, which is that I write something and then I think, oh God, nobody can ever look at this, and I can never be looked at again, which is shame. But then it's like you have to write the next thing, and I think that for me, writing the next thing is not about like getting out of shame, but it's instead saying, okay, like I have to keep doing it, and it's going to keep making me ashamed, but my job is literally contingent on my capacity to bear that, you know. I think that in this particular case, I was just interested in what else I could say, you know, if I wasn't constrained by having to make an argument, and if I could fess up to my actual motives, you know, rather than doing the thing which I think so much academic prose is, which is about, it is fundamentally about hiding, you know, fundamentally about barricading one's actual reasons for arriving on the page. So, yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and I will keep thinking about it, but my initial impulse is to say, I don't know, there's no redeeming shame, just learning how to live with it.
We have time for maybe